Back in the locker room, Tunch and Wolf. This segment is brought to you by Sprint. Now, we are helping the Steelers kick off their 75th anniversary celebration. In a couple weeks, they made the announcements of all the stuff that's going to happen around town. Well, joining us, none other than former Director of Communications and Marketing and our old good buddy, Joe Gordon. Joe, thanks so much for joining us.
It's great being here with you guys. Looking forward to it.
Can you believe he even dressed up for you? He's not wearing a sweatsuit.
I did. I didn't wear my semi-formal sweatsuit.
I'm very impressed. Thank you.
Hey, Joe, you know, I don't think anybody better than you could kind of set the record straight. Every time I'm out, there are a few questions that people all want to know. The first question, kind of Steeler legends, for lack of a better way to put it. How did the Chief really buy the team? Was it winning it? Did he win the team at a horse race?
The greatest misconception, and it keeps happening over and over again, and now it's 75 years. So it's been going on for 75 years. He bought the team in 1933 for $2,500. Mm-hmm. In 1938 is when he had the big day at the racetrack, supposedly won anywhere between $250,000 and $350,000. So he already owned the team, but the important thing was those winnings enabled him to keep the team and meet the payroll every week.
So there was no card game, no guy?
No, $2,500. At that time, he was in 1933, prior to owning the Steelers, he had a semi-pro team called Hope Harvey.
Right. And
also the Rooney Reds. And that kind of evolved into the Steelers. Some of those players continued to play in the NFL with the first Steelers teams. But he'd been a sports promoter, boxing, different things like that, and that's how he raised the $2,500, which, of course, at that time was a lot of money.
Now, speaking of a boxing promoter, the Chief was also a guy who boxed a couple of his head coaches, did he not?
I don't know if he ever boxed any of his head coaches, but I know he challenged a few of them. And I don't know of any of them who took him up. But, you know, he did qualify for the Olympics. I believe in he was born in 08, he died in 88, so he died in 88 at 81. So I think it was the 1920 or 24 Olympics. He qualified for the Olympic team as a boxer. He was a very good athlete and very tough athlete. But I think those Olympics were in Tokyo, and at that time that was like light years away. And the Olympics weren't then what they are today. So he passed on it.
Now, you're originally from Pittsburgh, Squirrel Hill area. Went to Alderdice High School, and you started working you were a #1 draft pick right before Joe Green and Chuck Noll in 1969, right?
That was the year I came to the Steelers, in '69. But prior to that, I'd worked for the pro basketball team in Pittsburgh, then the minor league hockey team in the first 2 years of the Penguins. And that's where I first met the Rooneys, when I was working for the minor league hockey team. That was another thing. The Chief was a great hockey fan, and he would come to the minor league games. I'd say probably half of the games, and I would see him. And at that time, he had an amazing ability to relate to people, as you guys know. Regardless of what level you were on, he was comfortable, and he made you comfortable. So he would come to the games and talk about the Steelers, and at that time, Steelers were a pretty feudal team. And once in a while, he'd write me a note. And he was so blunt and so open. We're not very good. We're not tough enough, talking about the Steelers. And I was just amazed. And during that period, I said, geez, if I could ever go to work for this guy, it'd be like being in heaven, and ultimately it did come true.
How did that come about, the whole process of you coming to play for
the way it happened? I was working for the Penguins, and Ed Kiley called me up. He was the PR guy at that time. This was in 1969, or 1969, 68, the end of 68. And he said, Dan Rooney would like to talk to you. And that's when the offices were in the Roosevelt Hotel. The entry was on the first floor, scouting was on the third floor, and executives were on the 8th floor. So you're running up and down. But anyhow, I went to see Dan. He told me they were planning to move into Three Rivers Stadium in 1970. They were going to expand their staff, and would I be interested in working for the Steelers? And I said, when do I start? So I started in '69, our last year at Pitt Stadium, and then when we moved over to Three Rivers. But the thing that amazed me the most about Dan, and still amazes me, and you really got to give him the bulk of the credit for the success that the Steelers have had since 1970, is his vision. He just seemed to be so far ahead of almost everybody else in the National Football League. And the best example of that was he was probably the #1 confidant of Pete Rozelle and Paul Tagliabue. He was was and still is a consensus maker.
Right.
All the other owners get along with Dan and respect Dan. And
so does Gene, the executive
absolutely.
director of the NFL
I mean,
Players
his relationship with Gene Upshaw, who of course is the head of the Players Association, is so unique, not just in sports management, but in the labor movement all over the country. That the head of the labor union and the owner of a team, in this case the Steelers, and a leader in league affairs, they have such a close personal relationship built completely on respect. And that's the thing that has always impressed me about all the Rooneys, the respect that they have for people in general. You guys knew that as players. I mean, I don't think that there's anywhere close in the NFL to an owner having that relationship that Dan has with his players and the chief had, and I'm sure ultimately Art will have with the players, and it's built strictly on respect.
You know, it always made me laugh because the chief would, whenever he would see me in the locker room in the halls, he would say, "Tunch, my boy, how are things in Turkey? Are they still killing each other over there? Just like Ireland." I mean, he would say that every time that he would see me, and it would just, and his stories were, you know, his best was, you know, I used to love him to hear him tell stories about George Halas. For some reason, he just would crack me up with the stories about the entourage that George Halas would travel.
You know, you
with.
mentioned earlier about the chief ever going to Fist City with any of his coaches.
Mm-hmm.
He used to tell the story that in the old days when there were only like 12 teams in the league and you only played 10 or 11 or 12 games, there were always contentious meetings. Nobody was ever on the same page. And he got into a fierce argument once with Halas. And Halas was really livid, and Halas wanted to go outside with him. And when things cooled, and the chief didn't go outside, he used common sense. But anyhow, later the chief told me, he said to Halas, he said, "You know, George, if we'd gone outside, you weren't any sure thing." And that was typical. But what I used to really love about the chief was in the lobby, as you remember, at Three Rivers Stadium, he'd walk up and down.
Yeah.
And he was doing it a lot for exercise, but if he'd see somebody sitting there in the middle of the afternoon, he'd walk over to him and say, "Hey, what's your name?" "My name's Rooney."
Yeah.
The guy would say, "Oh, I'm John Smith." He'd say, "Where are you from?" He'd say, "McKeesport." He'd say, "McKeesport." He said, "You know so-and-so in McKeesport." He said, "I used to play a lot of ball in McKeesport." And then he'd take the guy back into his office, and the guy would be stunned and say, "Wow, here I am in Art Rooney's office, I'm talking." We give him a cigar and said, "Next time you're around, let me know. We'll go to lunch."
I love the way he used to come around and shake your hand.
Yeah.
I mean, that was such a cool thing before or after a game.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
He was just always there to wish you well as a player, win or lose. You know? That was cool.
Absolutely. And like I said, the respect thing, he just, I mean, to me, that was just the greatest quality a person could have. And he had it for everybody at any level. It didn't matter who you were or what you did. He just treated everybody the same, and that was something very special.
My favorite Chief story is we're in the lobby before the draft. Me, Ted Walton, and Nate Washington, and all three of us got drafted in '80. But we had just met with the doctors for our physicals, and we were getting ready to meet Chuck. The Chief walks in, and he's got a big ashtray, and he's emptying the little ashtrays into this big ashtray, and he's chewing on a cigar. And he's got a cardigan with a golf shirt, and the cardigan's misbuttoned, so it's hanging down. So he looks kind of disheveled, you know. And he says, "Hello, young fellas, what are your names?" We each introduced ourselves, and Nate Johnson goes, "So what are you, the janitor here?" And I'm going, "Don't you know who that is?" But the Chief was beautiful. He played it off. He goes, "I do a little of everything around here." And I thought he was actually honored that
Right.
Nate thought that he was a janitor.
Anybody else would have been offended.
Yeah,
Yes.
but he was honored by that.
Think about Jerry Jones. Do you think Jerry Jones
Exactly.
would just laugh that off? No.
I don't think so.
Jerry Jones wouldn't have been out in the lobby.
Yeah, that's
To
true.
begin with, but if he was,
Emptying ashtrays,
he
yeah.
would have said, "Get rid of this guy." Would have been cut that day.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll have more with Joe Gordon right here in the locker room.